Today on CityCast DC, we're going to talk about the Bombshell report about DC police and the case of Republican Congressman Corey Mills. We're talking about the troubling conversation after the murder-suicide of former Virginia Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, and how to get your money back as part of DC's Ticketmaster settlement. Plus, in a members-only fourth segment, Amazon is way behind, even further behind, on all those jobs it would promised would come to its Arlington HQ2. I'm joined by Michael Pope from Virginia Public Radio and the Virginia Press Room podcast, and my CityCast co-host, Bridget Todd. Today is Tuesday, April 21st. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Bridget.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, Michael.
Good to hear you again.
Good to hear you, too. There was a story I thought was just fantastic in the Washington Post over the weekend about the case of Corey Mills. They got access to body cam footage and public records. Basically, for the uninitiated, there was an incident, allegedly, a domestic assault incident between Mills and a woman. And the woman quite quickly recanted her story. There was talk about whether the DC police investigated it as thoroughly as they would have if it had been a regular citizen who was the alleged assaulter. The Post got the officer's body cam footage, and it turns out, one, it captures her injuries, and there's like a really troubling conversation with Mills where he's saying, like, I'm going to call the attorney general to, on you, this officer, and whereas the woman sort of gets a mystery phone call, they think it might be Mills, at the end of which she suddenly recants her story. He had encouraged her, apparently, to say, I bruise easily, and I got these injuries riding camels on a vacation to Dubai. And it turns out also that police wanted to go back and arrest him, and the then U.S. Attorney for D.C., Ed Martin, said, no, nothing doing. So we're in this season right now with the teen takeovers and the Trump police takeover of Trump's takeover last year of the MPD, where there's all these accusations from the administration of the DC, the wokes in charge of DC, don't let cops do their job, etc. But here's another way that the city isn't quite self-governing, and where it appears that the people in the Trump administration didn't let these cops do their job. And I haven't seen a lot of people putting that together, but the whole thing just strikes me as outrageous.
And you hear in the footage that the cop basically disagreeing with his higher-ups about whether or not there should be an arrest. So to your point, Michael, this idea of cops not being allowed to police and do their job and enforce the law, what do you call this?
I was really feeling for the responding officer as I read that front page story in the Sunday Washington Post. I feel like the officer was really trying to do his job and get some justice for this victim, but then she's changing her story. The higher-ups aren't agreeing with him. The congressman is making his life difficult. The prosecutor is not on board. And I was really feeling for the responding officer because he was trying to do the right thing in an environment where everyone was against him. What also strikes me is Congressman Mills. If you look at his record as a congressman, he kind of fashions himself as a pro-law enforcement Republican from this part of Florida that he represents. If you look at his two main things that he's pursuing, one of them is called the Halting Inappropriate Targeting of Officers Now Act, which would prohibit federal agencies from contracting with businesses that refuse to serve law enforcement. So it means trying to fashion himself as so pro law enforcement that he wants to go after businesses that don't cooperate with law enforcement. And then also he's got something involving the Capitol Police, like a just in case reserve funding in case there's a shutdown and they don't get paid. So it is really interesting that this particular congressman that we're talking about is so pro law enforcement.
So the thing that gets me about all this is, look at this sort of situation. It must be incredibly difficult if you are an officer whose job is to make a case that will stick in court, or if you're a prosecutor whose job is to decide on whether there is a case that will stick in court. It would be difficult in Kansas City. It'd be difficult in Seattle, wherever. Someone has changed their story. You don't know why. The congressman, just to be clear, denies that anything untoward took place at all and is stuck with that. But because of the nature of Washington, because the prosecutor making the decisions is not actually chosen by the people here, but is part of a national political system where, in this case, it involved a participant in that system, an ally of the government. He, in his conversations with the police officer, is saying he's worried that these charges, if they were to be brought, would be weaponized against him. That's a legit worry in politics, right? I mean, if I was running against somebody who had a domestic assault charge, I would weaponize the hell out of it.
And actually, we are seeing this happen. The Democrat who's running against him, Bale Dalton, is calling for his resignation, specifically citing an ethics probe against him that's unrelated, actually, having to do with contracting, and then also a restraining order from 20 years ago. So, I mean, this kind of behavior kind of is already being weaponized against him.
I don't know if I would say, I mean, I guess I understand what you're saying about weaponization, but like, if you've got a prior restraining order that someone was able to take to the courts were able to say, yes, there is enough evidence to pursue a restraining order, and then years later, someone is calling the police for a domestic incident, whether or not it actually happened, we don't know. But I don't know that I would say that is weaponizing when, like, it sounds like at least there is some evidence to believe something might have happened.
100%. And, one person's weaponization is another person's, like, this is a relevant point that the voters ought to know about.
Right, like a thing that happened.
About your character or about your record. I was just saying, like, that this situation is almost as if, like, it was designed for nobody to trust the outcome, right? Where you've got a prosecutor as part of an administration that has clearly, like, gone after enemies, so that his decision is not trustworthy. Maybe another prosecutor would have looked at it and said, "Gee, victim recanted their story. I'm sorry, but I don't think we can make a case here." But we don't. But in this case, because of all of the political crosswinds, you don't trust that judgment is like a dispassionate legal and professional judgment. You think it's something else. And this is a phenomenon that is, in this case, it sort of seeped right down to local DC, because you can't get much more local than a cop going to the door of an alleged domestic assault. And, that's the level that we're operating at now. So these are, we're not talking about like complicated, like federal bribery cases or international mystery. We're talking about like, a person who may have beaten the crap out of an intimate partner.
Don't forget, we're talking about this an environment where we have seen the resignation of Eric Swalwell, the California congressman, on similar situation, and also the resignation of Tony Gonzalez, the Texas congressman, for similars. This is a bipartisan issue. Swalwell, of course, being a Democrat, Gonzalez being a Republican, and this is the environment that we're talking about the story in.
But for those of us who live here, like wanting to have sort of basic trust in your police force around a thing that police forces didn't used to be very good at, which is to say, bringing justice to victims of domestic violence. And now, like, I don't know, maybe it was the right thing. Maybe it was a smart legal call, as gross as the situation is. Maybe it wasn't, but I don't know, and I don't have confidence in the people who are telling me one way or the other.
Yeah, and to that point, Schaefer, I would say, I mean, if you're a beat cop in any city, but especially DC, you probably have responded to domestics before. The idea that someone who made the call would say, "Oh, I bruise easily, I walked into a door." I don't think this would be the first time that this officer has dealt with that kind of thing. And I just think that you're right, that it just goes to show how little trust we have that the system is working as we think the system should be working. Whether that's because higher ups are leaning on police to not do their job, to let somebody go on these charges, or just the sense that like stuff is not working as we would like it to be working.
Okay, the last weekend of April, the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian is hosting one of those events that remind you why we are so lucky to live in DC. The Living Earth Festival is happening at the museum Saturday and Sunday, April 25th and 26th. It is free. It's a celebration of native art, creativity, and the power of clay, built around Always Becoming, this breathtaking outdoor sculpture installation by Nora Naranjo Morse. There's going to be live performances, artist demos, hands-on activities, and more. And definitely make time for the Mitsitam Cafe inside the museum. If you haven't already eaten there yet, you are missing out on one of the most underrated and unique spots in this entire city. And for my money, the best food you can get at one of the Smithsonian museums. Again, it's free on Saturday and Sunday, April 25th and 26th. Check out the full schedule of activities at americanindian.si.edu or the museum's social media at Smithsonian NMAI. Did you know DC gets fewer than 30 truly window weather days a year? Days that are sunny, not too hot, and not too cold. Window Nation's The More You Buy, The More You Save sale is going on now, and it is the perfect time to make the most of every one of those precious days. You could save up to 50% off all the windows for your home. Window Nation's installation crews can finish the job in 1 day or less, so you can enjoy the breeze with minimal disruption. Best of all, they offer a lifetime warranty on all their windows, so you can relax knowing your home is protected far into the future. But hurry, the sale ends soon. Schedule a fast free consultation now at windownation.com. In the same spirit of like horrendous domestic stories, this one much more horrendous. The news last week was about Justin Fairfax, the former Virginia lieutenant governor, apparently a murder-suicide where he killed his estranged wife, who was in the middle of a divorce with, Serena, and then killed himself. The facts of the case emerged last week, but there's been a interesting, fascinating, like really troubling sort of public conversation about it afterwards. Including for those of us in DC, mayoral candidate Kenny McDuffie saying, gee, I grew up with Justin Fairfax. He's from Northeast DC. He went to DeMatha. I'm heartbroken, which is, that is a perfectly valid reaction. Some of the other sort of old Justin bros were there was something a little bit off about it.
Yeah, I saw that playing out over the weekend, and it has not really quieted down. And I think it's one of the questions of how people respond when someone that they have known or someone who is prominent that they might have a connection to does something that is horrific. I was pretty troubled to see people posting pictures with Justin being like, we were frat brothers together, we came up together. I understand wanting to like honor this person that you knew, but they would post these pictures of Serena with the person who murdered her. And just the way that what actually happened to her was so easily kind of, I won't say erased, but cast aside. And, we saw the pretty prominent Black journalist Roland Martin, who apparently is a frat brother of Justin Fairfax, or was, posting a picture with him, getting a lot of backlash for it, and then being like, okay, I'll take the picture down, but not because people told me to, but because the frat reached out and asked me to. I think that we're really seeing kind of how complex these conversations are and how there's so much to hold, but really that we gotta do better of telling the story of what happens when a powerful man does something horrific to a woman. How do we talk about that in a way that honors what actually happened and doesn't just sort of obscure this woman's story and what she went through, and not to mention what her children went through?
Yeah, such a tragic story. Every time I open up any of my social media feeds, I'm confronted with these pictures that you're talking about, right? So some of them are the people hanging out with Justin Fairfax, or photos of Justin Fairfax and his wife and his children too. I mean, that's another part of this, is the faces of the children often end up in these photographs that are being posted to social media. And lots of discussion about what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. And it's tough. I mean, it's a really difficult call because, so many people worked with Justin Fairfax and believed in him and wanted to see the best for him. So they're kind of mourning the loss of their friend. But at the same time, he did something so horrendous that it's difficult to get a grip of that. I did think it was interesting, the statement that was put out by Governor Abigail Spanberger mentions Serena Fairfax by name, mourning her loss, does not even mention the name Justin Fairfax.
The even more ugly part of the discourse about this is, look, Fairfax was he was lieutenant governor of Virginia. He was accused, I think, credibly by more than one woman of sexual assault, and that was kind of the end of his political career. Allies shunned him. He didn't, that was it. And there is a school of thought, or at least a school of posting in social media, that says he was so distraught by, driven crazy by these accusations, that his downward spiral and effectively the murder of his wife was somehow the fault of the people who hounded him over sexual assault.
Yeah, there was a really interesting piece in News One by Dr. Stacey Patton where she talks about this idea of what they call, quote, fallen high status black man phenomenon, where basically, it's not really something that he did. It's the circumstances around him that forced him to do something like that framing, how particular it is, and how it really just obscures, I guess, in my opinion, like accountability, right? It's not his fault that this happened. It's the conversation about Black men's mental health, which is a very real conversation. But I think using these horrific actions to say like, oh, well, that's why we got to make sure Me Too doesn't go too far. And that's why we need to have these conversations about Black men and mental health, I think is just reinforcing some pretty toxic attitudes that don't actually get us much closer to the conversation about things like domestic violence, things like how hard it is for a woman to leave a man when she's in the process of divorcing that person. Like, I think those are conversations that we need to have. I'm not saying that conversations about mental health are not important, but it seems like there might be more important parts of this conversation that maybe need to be highlighted in this moment.
I mean, Bridget, one place I don't know if push back is the right word, but just like ask more is these people who knew Justin Fairfax and are mourning the death of their friend or the person they worked with or whatever. Fairfax was clearly a person who had been in distress, where the judge was worried about his mental health, his stability. It is human nature to say like, oh, my friend went crazy. The real Justin I knew would never have done this. This was the mental illness speaking. It's a horrific tragedy. And I'm mourning the person who was subsumed by that illness. Partly that's just human nature. If it's someone you're close to, you don't want to believe, actually, the person's a murderer or misogynist or whatever. But how do you factor that into the equation?
Oh, what a good question. I mean, I on the one hand, I get it. I understand the desire to sort of say like, oh my God, this person that I worked with or grew up with or admired, I lost that person. And so I'm having a big reaction to finding out about that loss. I understand that. But I also think, I just think it's complicated and hard, but also very important that we don't, in that understandable response to finding out something like this, that we don't then reinforce some attitudes that don't hold the accountable party accountable, right? As you said, Fairfax did have these two different, pretty credible accusations of sexual misconduct that really derailed his career. And so I could understand the desire to say like, oh, my friend would never do this. He was in the grips of alcoholism or a mental health crisis, all of that. But like, okay, so then what explains these two allegations, right? So like, I just think it's understandable and very easy to rush to find some explanation for why you don't have to think too deeply about this person, who they actually were, what signs you might have actually missed, and who they might have actually been in front of you, because that's really hard,
On that issue of the signs that were missed, I think there's probably a lot of people second guessing their own behavior at this point, because it seems like the downward spiral of Justin Fairfax had been going on for some time. I inadvertently actually came across a little bit of this during the General Assembly session, because I'm looking around the Senate chamber and you have all these portraits of the former lieutenant governor, and there is no portrait of Justin Fairfax in the Senate chamber. There's a portrait of Don Beyer and J. Sergeant Reynolds and Henry Howland. All the former LGs are up in the Senate chamber, but there is no portrait of Justin Fairfax. Meanwhile, they've already appropriated the money for the Winsome Earl Sears portrait, and the portrait of Governor Youngkin is already up elsewhere in the Capitol. So I started to ask around, okay, why is it we don't have a portrait of Justin Fairfax? One of the senators told me he refused to sit for a portrait because he was so angry about how he was treated and he wanted to clear his name. And it was like he felt like the portrait was a distraction from him clearing his name. And like, clearly there was a downward spiral there that I think a lot of people right now are second guessing, well, why didn't I do something? You know, like Justin Fairfax was a supporter of the red flag law, which seeks to take away firearms from people who are having a mental health crisis. Why did somebody not trigger the red flag law that he supported?
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that, because I grew up in Richmond, and my local Richmond newscaster, Kurt Autry, he put something on Facebook. I think he might have deleted it very quickly, where he said, oh, I kind of came across, our paths crossed because I met Fairfax. I gave him my personal cell phone number. I instantly regretted that because he was texting me all the time about what he saw as this conspiracy against him. You know, he was always texting me about wanting the FBI to investigate him to clear his name and all of that. And, you know, I bet when that happened, he probably wasn't thinking anything of it. But now in hindsight, you're like, oh, wait a minute. That it was sort of right in front of my face the entire time.
Yeah, I mean, clearly he was in this downward spiral that, again, I think there probably are a lot of people right now saying, why didn't I recognize the signs? You know, those who were really close to him that knew that he purchased the firearm with money that was supposed to go to his children's horse riding lessons. Those people are probably saying to themselves, why didn't I trigger the red flag law to get that firearm out of the household?
Michael, you cover Virginia politics, so just talk about where the impact and the reaction is there. The Spanberger's post, I think, is super interesting. Did she get any accolades for that, flack for that?
Well, I mean, I would say accolades to the extent that people respond to these kinds of incidents now differently than they did 5, 10 years ago. And so, you know, the way that she responded that was so specific to Serena Fairfax and remembering her rather than the person who killed her, the former lieutenant governor of Virginia, I think was welcomed. I mean, it's difficult in this environment to say something was welcome, but it was received in a way that was, I think, a lot of people were thankful that she did not approach it a different way that might have been a little bit more problematic. But I mean, I would also say in the world of Virginia politics, people are still processing this. You know, I mean, like when I was talking about my social media feed, it's like obviously people who are in this world of Virginia politics, and people are still this morning putting out, you know, these long posts of their thoughts along with photographs. And some of those photographs, you got to wonder, like you're featuring this woman who has been murdered and the murderer and their children and the children's faces. I mean, like, I think there's still more of this that is still kind of unfolding.
So on Monday, DC announced a settlement with Ticketmaster, which, if you have paid enormous service fees for your tickets to things, you may be in for some money. This has struck me as like a big deal because, well, it's nice to get some money back because I think just about everybody has been jobbed at some point. But you know, we have a attorney general in the district who's now popularly elected, didn't used to be. There's some federal talk about like overriding DC and eliminating that office, but the Justice Department settled really preliminarily with Ticketmaster and basically whiffed. And DC was one of the jurisdictions that did not. Bridget, how do I get my money back, and how much money can I get?
Yeah, well, first of all, don't you think it's funny that Ticketmaster/Live Nation is one of those entities that everyone just universally hates. There's not many of them, but everybody hates Ticketmaster.
Yeah, actually, to that end, Virginia was also one of the states that worked with DC in this, and it was bipartisan. I mean, Bridget, you were saying this is sort of universal. This was a legal action that was entered into by Republican Attorney General Jason Miyares and Democratic Attorney General Jay Jones. Finished it off, and along with DC, refused to go along with this settlement that the DOJ wanted to do. They said this is not good enough. We're going to hold out here, and this is lesson learned because they obviously was a good idea for them to not accept the DOJ settlement and move forward with this. And I'm kind of curious, just as a consumer here, I've got Weezer tickets for October. They're $150 tickets. Guess how much the service fee was? $40. That's like 20.
It was really good service, though. the butler brought them straight to your door in one of those like silver platters with a cover on it.
I'm reminded of one of my favorite Weezer songs, "Can't Knock the Hustle," but I guess you can knock the hustle. So maybe the appropriate Weezer song is "Say It Ain't So."
Yeah, first of all, great Weezer reference. I'm absolutely knocking the hustle. So DC's reached a $9.9 million settlement with Live Nation and Ticketmaster over exactly what you were just talking about, Michael Pope, like these deceptive pricing practices, the stuff that you've absolutely encountered if you've ever bought concert tickets. So like, using a countdown clock and pop-up notifications to pressure folks if they were inactive by more than a minute, tacking on fees, saying that it'll cost one thing, and then when you check out, the fees are $40 later, so you can't even make a clear decision as a consumer. Things like that, things we've all encountered.
So, where do I go to get my money back? Do I have to prove that I was at a show?
So, according to what I read, a claims process is going to be announced in the coming months, so we don't quite know yet, but I will also say that there is a conversation happening about how much money this actually is. I am of the opinion that, it's like $9 million. We're talking about $1 billion company, so I don't know if it seems like a drop in the bucket. On the one hand, I don't want to poo-poo this as nothing because I think anything anything that's accountability, I will take. However, is this just the cost of doing business for $1 billion company like Ticketmaster, where it's like, oh, okay, we've done something wrong, just write it off, it's not a big deal. Will they even really feel this is my question.
Right, $9 million divided by the number of Ticketmaster tickets sold in the District of Columbia over the last however many years equals not that many dollars.
Well, the federal government might force Ticketmaster and Live Nation to split up, right? And to no longer engage in these anti-consumer practices. And so that's actually could be a long-term benefit for consumers.
And wait, where do you get the money? Like if you were a district resident and you went to a show in Virginia, or if you're a Virginia resident and you went to a show in DC, is it open to you? Is it based on where you're a resident, or is it based on where you saw the show?
Oh, that's a really good question. As far as I know, that the specifics of how folks can claim their money for this has not been made public. My understanding is that we're going to get more information in the coming months.
Well, I would, it's I don't know how much late night television you guys watch, but frequently there are these commercials, have you taken so-and-so drug in the last 20 years? Well, you might actually be a party to the settlement. So call us at this law firm and we'll help you get the money that you're needed. I mean, it's possible that we might see some television commercials for this in the near future.
Oh my gosh, this is like a hobby of mine. Even if it's $3, I want my $3. If I had to total it up from these class action, were you harmed, did you use Facebook in the last 6 months, whatever, I've probably gotten $200 in 2025 from those things. I always do them. And I always tell people get your little coffee money. Even it's $5. That's $5 more than that's in your pocket that now a big company doesn't get to have.
$200 will buy you 3 service charges.
Yeah, I can buy half of one Weezer ticket.
All right, I want to give a big thank you to our newest CityCast DC neighbor, Tom B. Thank you for your support. Today, paid subscribers get a bonus 4th roundup chat. We're going to talk about Amazon's lack of hiring in the DMV. If you want to be sure you always get a full episode, become a member. Head to membership.citycast.fm and sign up. It's only $10 a month. Members get ad-free listening, exclusive members events, and an extra events newsletter every week. Again, that's membership.citycast.fm. that is all for today here on CityCast DC. If you want more news, check out our newsletter, CityCast DC. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.